Is there a doctor in the house?
Doctor, you have a visitor in the main lobby.
Hello and welcome to the Talk To The Doc podcast, where we want to unpack some real-world lessons, hard-earned insights related to, I think, the most important thing in our organizations, our people. I'm your host, Steve the Dr. Meek, and hey, the doctor is in. Our guest today is Mark Mitford with HR Catalyst, so let's get on into it. Hey, Mark, welcome today.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Absolutely. I'm completely excited to hear from you. I've kind of heard you speak before and love your thoughts on things. So tell us a little bit more about you and, what you've got to offer.
Sure. I'll be happy to. So I'll just I'll try to keep it very concise and say I've been doing HR work for many, many years. Actually, I'm just into my year 36 of being in an HR role.
Wow.
So I've been doing this for a few minutes.
I feel like I should ask, what was it like to coach up Methuselah? But, maybe that's going back too
yes.
far.
Thanks so much. So, so I started off, so the short bio there is I started off big company, so Ericsson, Texas Instruments, PepsiCo. Then my last couple of years of my corporate life was actually spent in the middle market space. And in those stints, 3 corporate stints, 2 of those were private equity-backed portfolio companies. One was an S-Corp, anywhere from about 150 employees to about 1,500 employees. And that's where I had total HR responsibility, and that was kind of that light bulb moment for me about understanding all the facets of HR from soup to nuts. And that leads me to, on the calendar, or chronologically, that leads us to 2013. And then 2013, in October 2013, I actually founded HR Catalyst. And so we are, the fancy term is we are fractional HR executives. And so we cater to lower middle market size companies between 5 to about 100 million in revenue that are growing, and they're finding one of their biggest challenges and struggles is around the people side of their business. And so we go in there and support them from that perspective.
Excellent. I like that. I guess that's leaning into that catalyst aspect of your business name. Helping to supercharge their resource efforts.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That was actually a little known fact. I was pre-med for 3 years before I washed out of the pre-med program at Baylor, and so I understand organic chemistry. I understand a lot of biology and chemistry. So yeah, a catalyst is something that accelerates things. It doesn't really change it, and so at some point with clients, ironically, in a lot of cases, we will disappear with clients. We will be there for a period, help them build and create scalable HR processes, and then after that, we'll actually disappear right off into the sunset, so to speak, and then we will leave them in much better shape than they were prior to us involved in an engagement with them.
Awesome. That sounds great. Well, let's go ahead and jump into this. I appreciate you coming in for a doctor's visit today. And just to get started, I'd like to take the pulse of your industry. So in your head, what would you say is kind of the current state of the market, or what industry trend is top of mind for you?
Yeah, I would say it's interesting on that one, Steve, because there are, about a year ago this time, so we're going back into almost the summer of 2025, there were a lot more. There was only 0.6 applicants per job posting. So that meant for each job posting that was showing up in the economy, where companies had open positions of all types, there was actually only 0.6 candidates per job opening. And so right now, so that actually shows it was a challenging market that favored the employee or the candidate looking for work, because there was a lot less employees and there were a lot more openings. That pendulum has actually swung to now last thing I saw about a month or two, probably about a month ago, there's 1.1 candidates for each job opening. So there's actually more candidates out there than there are for positions to fill. So when you're looking at that demographic, it's interesting. So it's actually becoming a little more challenging now because there's more candidates. So it's actually now the pendulum has swung back over to the employer a bit. So the employer should have a better, so fancy the terms here. There should be more candidates to pick from than there are actually for qualified for positions that are posted. So that's actually an interesting thing economically. And even though, living in DFW, we're very blessed, we still have a pretty low employment level, probably around 4%. But still, the bottom line is, companies still need to do an excellent job when they're recruiting, because even though there's more candidates out there, the candidates are still looking for those key jobs and those key positions and companies that they really want to target working for.
Now, in that metric, do you feel that's is that driven by kind of some of the layoffs or downsizings? Is that driven by AI reduction of some of the entry level jobs? Where do you feel that that number? What's causing that number to move?
Right. I think it's a bit of just exactly what you hit the nail on the head, Steve. I think a little bit of it's AI. I would say for most, AI is still so in its infancy stage that I don't think a lot of organizations are really eliminating that many. And maybe in the Fortune 500 world, some organizations are actually shrinking a few things that would be very repeatable processes.
Sure.
I would say some of them would be, let's say, accounts payable and accounts receivable. Something people clearly understand. When a company receives an invoice, they pay it. When they actually need to make a payment to a vendor. So very, what I would say, transactional type of positions. Those are some of them. They're actually shrinking their staff for some companies that are much larger. In the space that I play in, though, I don't think AI has really had a very strong impact just yet. Probably ask me that same question in 3 to 4 years, I'd have a different response.
Sure.
I think I think the other thing is that there are been companies, even in DFW, that have done some pretty significant layoffs. They've laid off 200, 300, 400 people at a shot. And so I think part of it is that there is efficiencies being gained. There's also, even in, when you look at an industry where there's a lot of merger and acquisition activity like banking, a lot of times when you have an acquisition, two companies get married in a way. What you do is a lot of times, HR positions, accounting positions, marketing positions, a lot of those support functions, they'll eliminate positions because they have two of each thing. They have two controllers, they have two staff accountants. So I think there's a little bit of that going on because the economy is in a little bit of, there's a lot of those headwinds out there for the economy right now.
Gotcha. Sure.
A lot of uncertainty. Of course, unfortunately we have the in Iraq and the Middle East going on. So I think when there's uncertainty, then a lot of companies are really very, they're cautious about hiring. And in some cases, to keep the bottom line, they're actually doing some reductions.
Gotcha. So what does an organization do, I guess, in that space? I hear you saying, the importance of recruiting. I hear you saying maybe stalled opportunities for new positions going on. What's an organization to do? How do they keep the recruiting going when they're not hiring, but still kind of maintain that presence out there? Because, like you say, there's a lot of uncertainty. Things could turn around in one contract, an opportunity, one change, and all of a sudden you need 10 people or 50 people or whatever. How do organizations cope with those two uncertainties and staying in touch?
Right. I would say that to me, all organizations and a lot of organizations that I work with, one of the things they possibly miss for them is if they don't have if they don't have a job opening, they're not recruiting. So I would say one of the key things that companies need to do is companies always need to be looking for talent. And so I think they always have to be looking for talent because not only perhaps they may have they may win a big contract where they need to hire an extra 10 people or 20 people or what have you. But on the other flip side is sometimes they are also active. They could be losing people. So people could be slipping out the back door. Somebody gets recruited by somebody else that gets poached, or they may be they may be terminating somebody because of performance. So I would say for positions that are very core to an organization, that are like one of their, if there's a handful of 10 core positions they have, organizations should always be recruiting. Because the key is there, you always need to have a pipeline. And a deficiency that a lot of companies that I would work with that are lower middle market size companies, what they do is if they don't have an opening, then they're not actively recruiting. And what that does, unfortunately, then the time to fill, the time to hire, actually then becomes more lengthened.
Sure.
Yeah. And that's definitely a huge issue for a lot of companies because it could take them 30, especially if the position's very specialized, it could take them 30, 45, 60 days to hire. And during that time, they could be burning out people within their department, and that could be problematic.
Sure. So let me ask another question there then. We've written kind of a service glossary for our organization to kind of make sure that terms we're using mean exactly what we think they're using. Sometimes people make assumptions. So when I hear recruiting, I think of something specific. But in your head, when you're advising organizations to keep the recruiting efforts going, what can you break that down a little bit more to make sure that my language and your language or my audience's language is the same on that?
Sure, no, be happy to. So I would say the recruiting process, it's all the way from having a good job posting. And it's amazing that and posting does not equal a job description. That's one of the biggest misses. A job description really talks about the core qualifications and attributes of the job. A job posting really needs to be written, and a lot of times too, a best practice is very advisable is actually having your marketing team actually write the job posting, because you want to make sure it sounds kind of cool and sexy. Yeah. Even if the job is a help desk job, you want to make sure it sounds kind of cool. That you're doing that, you're helping to find solutions, you're troubleshooting. And a lot of times, unfortunately, HR people, and myself included, I'm not a marketing person. So I think one of the biggest things is making sure your job posting, it really highlights the culture, it highlights the great thing about the company, how long have you been in business, the type of clients you work with. What is a differentiator for your business over somebody else who does exactly what you do? Why should they come to work for you versus the company down the company 2 blocks away or the company 2 miles away? So I'd say that's one of the biggest things to do. And the other big thing is I think a lot of companies have a lot of misses on is truly what is the selection process. When you're actually, let me just back and say, what is making sure that you have the interview process dialed in? Mm-hmm. Because sometimes you have people interviewing, you might have 6 managers interviewing for the position, and each one of them has a little bit of a different way to interview. So it's almost like when you come down to candidates and maybe they get together and say, hey, we saw 20 candidates, and you have 6 managers in a room or 3 managers in the room. One may be looking for an apple, one's looking for a banana, the other one's looking for a mango. And they say, well, this candidate's great because they did this. This candidate's great because they do this. So I would say one of the biggest things that we try to help clients with too, it's not rocket science. Have the same structured interview questions for each manager. So you're asking the same thing, so then you can actually aggregate information that's not too messy. It's almost like in your world, in the IT space, Steve, it's almost like if you're programming in different languages. If one person's programming in one language and somebody's programming in another language, I would imagine if you try to actually bring together what's coded, it's not going to be pretty. So it's almost like a symphony. If you go to the symphony and go to the Bass Performance Hall in Fort Worth, if you have the symphony playing 2 different pieces, it's going to sound really bad.
Sure.
Even though the music could be beautiful, if everybody's playing different pieces or they're actually on different parts of the piece, it's going to sound really messy and very ugly. So gotcha. Making sure, and part of that goes back into scalable processes, which we try to help organizations with.
So I think the key things I heard there is that as you do the job description, yes, you have to have a laundry list of all the duties, but just a reminder that you're trying to attract someone to your organization and identify people whose uniqueness fits in with your uniqueness, and then they can kind of lean into a role where they'll be successful, in your efforts. and then making sure that you systematize how you're doing your HR, so everyone's in the same system, and everyone kind of working towards that same apple, as opposed to everyone's got their own different target for what they're after in the interview.
Correct. Yeah, that's a great way that's a great way to put a bow on it.
Now, at one point, I had people on both sides of the equation that I knew, people who were looking for jobs, saying that there were some companies ghosting them. I had some companies saying that they were conducting interviews and some people ghosting them. Is that still, with things flip-flopped on, the pursuit of this, is that still a thing, or are you hearing things like that?
Yeah, it still is the short answer, to expand on just a little bit. I think that in some cases, and I'm to say this is a generational thing, mm-hmm. but part of it is, I think younger employees, now we're into graduation season. So a lot of thousands of kids are getting their newly minted degree, all proud of it. And I think part of it is just, it's about, just staying in touch and staying connected with people. So I think in some cases, some candidates don't understand if they ghost, if a candidate's an employer, it's not going to look well for them. It's not going to look good for them. And then on the other side too, I think that there are organizations that do a very poor job of following up with candidates. I would say the biggest thing, so we do a little bit of recruiting at HR Catalyst, and it's not uncommon if we have an HR role, an entry-level HR role, we may get 200 applicants for that one role. And so, unfortunately, when somebody is an applicant versus a truly qualified candidate, so an applicant is now the systems, it's so easy to apply that it puts the company at a disadvantage, because somebody may be looking at an HR role and they've worked at, their experience is working as a retail stocker at Target, but they think they can do HR because they like people. Well, right. Probably not a really qualified applicant.
Sure.
So I would say until that applicant becomes a candidate, and when I say candidate, the differentiation in my mind is a candidate is somebody who actually meets the qualifications, and that's usually going to be only, let's say, 5 to 10% of the people who are considered applicants. They actually meet the qualification, they have the experience, they are within the right salary range, and those candidates, when they become a candidate, I think the employer needs to do a good job of making sure they're much more high touch with those candidates. And the good thing with candidates is it's a much narrower. So if you have 100 people apply, you may only have 10 viable candidates. So I think it's incumbent on the employer and the recruiter to make sure they actually reach out to these individuals in some way, shape, or fashion, even if they say, you know what, thanks for applying, but you're way too overqualified, or you're underqualified. At least they have some sort of a personal touch with those candidates once they become truly bona fide candidates.
Gotcha. So there's someone there for both sides. If you're the candidate, staying connected, communicating, just simple email or message, hey, I'm not going to make it or whatever, is probably pretty valued. And from the flip side, for the employers, that the largeness of some funnels for some roles, you may get a whole bunch of applicants that you still need to notify somehow, but especially the true to that position, have some sort of communication with them.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. Now, I guess, are you seeing that automation, seeing more automations around the hiring process or interview process, and new ways that are with the volume?
Yeah, I think that an area where AI is starting to have a large impact, I would say more so, let me go back to PepsiCo.
Okay.
Pepsi is, when I was there years ago, it was 300,000 employees, 300,000 globally.
Wow.
So at any point in time, Pepsi may have, let's say, 500 job openings. I don't know, but I'm just going to throw that out for example purposes. So the good and the bad of it with the AI, a lot of things are, from a recruiting perspective, they're looking for, just like they would in SEO searches, when they're looking at search optimization, search engine optimization, mm-hmm. A lot of times the company will then put into Well, so in some cases though, if that applicant doesn't have those keywords in their resume, they will automatically be kicked out. So that in 90% of the cases that could be really good, but in 10% of the cases that could be really bad.
Sure.
Because that person does not have those keywords dialed in on their resume. And so that person who could be a really good candidate would sometimes be kicked out. So I would say their automation can create huge efficiencies if you do high volume recruiting. But the biggest miss, I would say, is that there are going to be some qualified candidates who also get pulled out of the pool because it's just separating, you're just trying to be as efficient as you can. And sometimes that efficiency will mean that you lose some qualified candidates along the way.
Sure. And, that definitely makes sense. The pattern matching, AI might be able to help out with some of that, but, it also requires someone picking the right, and how difficult it is when, is that description really done by HR or by the hiring manager, but, it could cause some potential mismatches that could work against you.
Correct. And even on that note too, Steve, just making sure the job posting is making sure it's actually updated, because in some cases a job description, which you start with, sometimes the last time that job description was touched was like 5 years ago. And so what the person does in that job what the job description is no longer what that person actually does. So I'd say step number 1 too is make sure the job description is up to date before you even start, or else it's a classic line of garbage in, garbage out. So if you start with a bad situation, it's only going to get worse. And sometimes you've got in there. Sometimes there's been a new process. Maybe now you have an ERP system. You have a certain CRM that you're using. And sometimes you start out with a bad situation, and then as you kind of go through the process of, you're not even actually hiring. You want the perfect candidate would be an apple, and you're out for a banana. So, you're going to get your fruit, but it's not going to be the fruit that you want.
Well, it's better than hiring for a taco when you're looking for an apple.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah, that's always challenging in the IT industry. We're always evolving the tools that we're working with, always evolving the versions that we work with. Always getting rid of commoditized skills or things that are needed. As we always try to move upstream and do real work as opposed to have big brains attached to small work, as I sometimes think of it.
Right. Sure.
Now, let's go ahead and move on. I guess the next thing I'd like to talk about is moving into what I like to term the blood pressure. What performance metric tells you the story right now in your industry?
Yeah, I would say the performance metric around if you're looking at specifically regarding recruiting, I would say the biggest metric would be one of them I mentioned a little bit earlier, but time to fill. How long does it take to fill a position? And I would say filling a position, first of all, you have to set the metric. You got to you have a good definition for the metric. So one that I've commonly used over the years would be from the time the position is actually officially posted. It's posted on job boards, till the time you actually either you get an accepted offer, or some cases you actually get a butt in a seat. Because if the person accepts the offer, but if they're working, they have to give, ideally they give weeks notice. But making sure you're looking at hiring efficiency, because a hiring target on efficiency for time to fill is usually an average is 45 days. And that's an average. And that could include a job that's 15 hours, $15 an hour, to a job that's $100,000. So when you're looking at an average, so the $15 an hour job would be much quicker to fill typically. Whereas the $100,000, let's say it's a manager position, it's probably going to take you a longer time, because you're going to be a little more choosy on and your process is probably going to have a little bit more scrutiny to it. But I would say making sure you have a good time to fill metric, because it not only your recruiting efficiency from a recruiting or HR perspective, but one of the things that is also can very frustrating is that managers may not be fully committed to actually interviewing people. And so something that can happen there, which is very common when we work with clients, is that sometimes, hey, we're so busy we can't recruit, we can't interview. And you may have one or two really good candidates, and if they're really good candidates, guess what? They're probably going to land another position.
Sure.
So if you tell me on a Wednesday you can't interview them till next Monday or Tuesday, so you've got to make sure that there's from a recruiting perspective, and there's a commitment from the hiring manager perspective. Because in some cases, really good applicants, if they're looking for a job, they're looking for a job. Most of them have not just targeted your company because, oh my gosh, I really want to work for this company, and I'm going to wait. In most cases, that's not realistic. In some cases, they're out of work, and so they need a paycheck. And it's not uncommon that you find candidates drop out of the pool because they took another job. So you got to make sure there's efficiency on both sides, the recruiting side and also the hiring manager side. They really have to work as a cohesive team to make that all flow.
Gotcha. Yeah, we used to, like 10 years ago, pre-COVID, we used to do a lot of stuff around top grading, it's such a that we, when we first started it worked great, but as time went by and things got faster paced, we found that a lot of those better candidates, had connections. If they were really good, then they knew people, and so we found that the speed at how we followed through on some of those kinds of elements made it harder and harder to hire people because we're still at that second interview when they've already got an offer somewhere else. So we kind of moved
so
away
making
from that
sure, that's all synchronized, and making sure you actually work closely with the managers when you're starting the recruiting process, so that you can make sure there's accountability on both sides of the fence.
Gotcha. Nate, now you targeted butts in the seat, but what about ramp up? Once you get someone on board, do you have another metric for how you measure them ramping up to being fully ready to go? And because that could be a factor in the length of you want to think about things.
Sure. I would say a little bit of that's going to be role specific, because some roles are much. So I would say, but a good standard metric for onboarding, organizations should have a fairly comprehensive, at least a 12-week onboarding program that is very systematic, that's very systematic. It's a very consistent process, a lot of weekly check-ins between manager and employee. And the other big thing there is the manager. It's really critical that the manager understands what are the metrics the manager creates around when the person would be considered fully productive. What does that look like? And again, very wildly, some less complex positions, you might expect that within 6 weeks they will be fully productive. Some much more complicated, because it could be 6 months. So, but making sure HR understands with the manager that, if this manager comes back screaming to you, I don't think this person's going to work out, and I think we need to get rid of them quickly. I think the biggest thing I would ask is, well, what are they missing? Why are you saying that? What are they hitting from a productivity perspective that you're concerned about? I'd say that's one of the biggest things, making sure the managers are held accountable for having metrics around what is like, and what does that ramp up time look like for productivity. The other big thing on onboarding that we really emphasize is if a company does a poor onboarding process, the chance of them leaving, an employee leaving within the first year of employment is typically anywhere between 3 to 5 times greater. So 3 to 5 times greater for that person to leave if you do a poor onboarding process. And to onboard and to recruit, actually going back to recruiting, it's usually now a metric that's a standard metric, and again, this is an average. It's about $7,000 to $10,000 to actually recruit a person from start to finish. $7,000 to $10,000, and of course the variability, that's an average. So it could be lower for hourly workers, and it could be much higher if it's much more of a managerial or level position.
Gotcha. So if you're not doing good onboarding, you're probably resulting in high turnover, and it's adding costs over and over again to the organization that you're not really considering. It almost sounds like
organization. No, I was just going to say really quickly on that too. And some organizations say, well, we have 20 to 25% turnover annually, and they're okay with it. So if they're a 100-person organization, that means they lose 25% turnovers. I mean they lose a year. Just so we're clear on turnover rate.
Yeah.
And some people act, well, it's just what it is in our industry, and we really can't do anything about it. And some people are just like, well, we're okay with it, but they've peeled back the onion on the cost. Some leaders and owners, companies, they are shocked when they find out the true cost of 25% turnover.
Yeah, that almost sounds to me. It sounds like a leadership escape room. You know, you bring people in, and then they have to find a way out so they can go on somewhere else.
Right, and sometimes they haven't done a good job of quantifying it from a cost perspective.
Now, as far as 12-week onboarding, you come in and you work with organizations, and I'm sure you help them out with their onboarding process. What are suspects that you see as far as organizations missing from their onboarding process that you go, wow, this is gold. You need to make sure that's in there every time. Are there 3 things that you think of that you need to make sure that every onboarding process has these things in it?
Right. I would say for 2 to 3, I would say one of the key things is assigning a mentor or a buddy to that employee. And ideally that person should be somebody who has been with the organization for a long time and is a good performer. A good or really good, a rock star performer. So that's number 1. And that should not be the person's manager. So this should be a different person than the manager, so that they get scared to ask questions.
Sure.
It's almost like the classic line of, no such thing as a stupid question. But sometimes they may not want to ask the boss the question because they may say, this is so silly, I don't know how to do this. The second one is for at least the first 6 weeks of the onboarding process, so let's say 50% through, the managers should be scheduling at least a 15 to 20 minute one-on-one with that employee, ideally on a Friday afternoon. And that one-on-one is a free-flowing discussion. It's structured, and it usually has just 3 or 4 questions. How was your week? How did your week go? How did your week go? What did you learn this week? What questions do you have for me? And then the 4th item could be, where do you need my help? How can I support you being successful? And I say the last one is around servant leadership. It's like, what can I do to help you? And if you ask that question, it really helps the person to feel like, the manager's in my corner. Even though the manager wants me to get as productive as fast as I can, this is also, asking that open-ended question like that is going to allow that employee, and the good thing is if you do this weekly, the employee will feel much more comfortable in actually asking the manager for help. And so it also builds up rapport. It will build up a level of relationship and trust with the manager, because in some cases people leave the organization. They say, why are you leaving within 6 months? Well, I really didn't trust my boss, and my boss really never talked to me, and my boss sometimes even forgets my name. And sometimes it's as basic as, just building that. Part of that onboarding process it's trying a relationship. And I say force, but that's not a negative word. It's trying to create the forum for a relationship. And it's also creating a forum for dialogue, and it's an environment to create trust, to increase the trust level between the manager and the employee. And then I think the last thing would be, if the position you do hire a lot of, making sure you have a roadmap for what that onboarding plan, what is this sequential onboarding plan? What is this going to look like? And making sure you have that sequence and a roadmap for the first 12 weeks.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, when you're in an organization, you come in, kind of help them fix their create an onboarding plan or help them fix their onboarding plan. Do you have like a process where you encourage them and come back and re-onboard existing employees or anything like that? Or what are your things there?
It's probably a great suggestion, Steve, but we typically don't. Could be something food for thought. I would say the key thing there is maybe similar in a way, but I would say, and we've done blogs on this, we have a blog we put out, we've had a blog for about 6 or 7 years. One of the key things within the blog we talk about is making sure you re-recruit your existing staff, because I think one of the misses with organizations is they sometimes take, you take a 3, 5, 7 year employee for granted, So what are you doing to make sure you're continuing, you're not only recruiting externally, but you're also recruiting internally? And what are you trying to make sure you're trying to retain the employees that you have on board? Because part of that attrition is sometimes it's like, the employee may say, well, the boss just takes me for granted. They barely talk to me. They never give me an attaboy or attagirl. They never show me praise of any type. And this is, unfortunately, happens a lot with really high performers. It's almost like the boss expects them to do a great job every day.
Sure.
And they still are a person, and they still need some TLC. So, and that's critical because some people, they leave a company, and their boss is shocked. Like, why are you leaving? Well, you really use performance level for granted. And it would be really nice to say, hey, Steve, I really appreciate your hard work. I really appreciate you mentoring these 2 new employees. That's huge, and that's really something I wanted to say, a sincere thank you. Or let's go out to have lunch today. Let me see how you're doing. Let's go drink or grab dinner or what have you. Just something, let's go play golf, whatever it is. Something to make sure you're still touching the employees who are your high performers, those golden people you need to make sure you are retaining at all cost within those organizations. And those high typically 10 to 20% of your employee staff.
Now, I heard you kind of throw out a few different ideas for, saying thank you to people that are, kind of were a little bit ad hoc in nature. But a while back, I'd heard that, like Employee of the Month programs and those kinds of things are, not what they used to be.
Yeah.
Are there more formalized recognition programs that you see organizations adopting that kind of systematize the recognition process for those people who are doing well?
Yeah, there are. I would say part of it is, of course, I would say the biggest one is having some sort of a formalized bonus program. Most, and not everybody, but of course, most people are driven but financially. If you pay them more or you give them a bonus, that bonus could even be a spot award. So I like companies to do spot awards too.
Okay.
And when we're doing a spot award, sometimes I'm even like, you know what? Have a stack of gift cards for all managers or leaders like yourself. Have a stack of gift cards for maybe like either Starbucks, I don't know, have Starbucks gift cards for $10, have Sonic gift cards for $10. What does that cost you if you have 20 of Starbucks and 20 Sonic cards for $10? That's going to be, it's really a small cost. But one of the key things there too, instead of having that formalized, having the program, but a lot of times that just pays out annually, but having a spot award where you could instantaneously say, hey, Jimmy, thank you so much for doing this. Sorry, I've got my lawnmower blower happening now. You're not hearing this in the background, but making sure that you can also do things that are smaller, that are more instantaneous, is great. The other big tip I tell for employers and managers is have a stack of blank cards. And sometimes one of the biggest things to do that will cost you little to no money is actually having a personalized card you actually give to the employee. If you give a card to one of your employees, thank you so much for this hard work. Thank you so much for staying late the last couple nights to help to get this big project done. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. You did an awesome job, Steve. And it's amazing how some people, they don't want a $10 gift card. They want just a sincere thank you that's handwritten. It's not an email. And it probably took you 1 minute to craft the message. And give it to the person. Say, hey, I just wanted to give you this card. Thank you so much. Shake their hand. I really appreciate your work and appreciate you being here. Sometimes that is very... So some of those things can be very much... It can be monetized. But some of them you can do that do not have there's no monetary to it, but it can still send a very strong message.
Gotcha. I like it. The personal touch. Let's go ahead and move on to the third category, weight. When I think of weight, I think of may not seem like it directly impacts things, but there's a whole strategy behind it. what's the strategy metric right now that in your head is really affecting HR in general, or that leaders should be mindful of?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is from that perspective is that it's around making sure equipping your leaders to lead their people effectively. So do you have a systemized, a scalable process around leadership development? Because and again, for years doing this for over 3 decades, the biggest misses is that the commonality is a lot of people are promoted into leadership roles or roles with managerial responsibilities because they're really good at their job, not because they're really a good leader. And so in some cases, it's the classic line is a salesperson. The last one that sometimes that makes no sense, because you take a good salesperson, you turn them managing salespeople, and some of them may really stink at managing people because they really want to be selling. And so making sure you are actually doing a good job of not only identifying who people are going to be, who should be put into leadership roles, but also equipping them to do their jobs. So with the clients we work with, right now I got 3 clients. We're going through a basic, it's almost like a leadership boot camp.
Okay.
But the leadership boot camp, small modules, typically 60 to 90 minutes in length. But these are foundational modules, foundations around good leader. How to communicate effectively, how to give and receive feedback, how to do things around disciplinary action, how to build trust, how to build teamwork, how to build motivation. So these are core foundational building blocks which leaders need to know about. And making sure, a lot of times I'd say a big deficiency is companies put people into leadership roles. They do not equip them to do their jobs. So one of the 2 biggest mistakes there is they become a huge liability exposure to the company.
Okay.
Because they may say really bad things. They may put really bad things into an email or a text, and that person may leave, and then they have a wrongful termination lawsuit on their hands. And then the other big thing too, from a leadership perspective, that leader needs to motivate people. They need to inspire people. They need to engage their people. Employee engagement is currently at a industry low. This is across the U.S. And employee engagement continues to go down, not up. And one of the key things, the direct correlation of employee engagement is the direct manager. It's not the CEO, it's not the COO or the CFO. The executive team, it's the direct manager who directly correlates employee engagement. So making sure you equip those leaders to be successful. And we've been doing leadership development work with a lot of our clients for the last probably 6 years or so, or 7 years. And it's really helping leaders those first line leaders, quite often they are not equipped to do their jobs. And that's why in some cases people leave because of their boss. They're not leaving because of the executive team. They're leaving because they're direct boss, because that's who they have the interaction in. So I'd say making sure you're training leaders to be effective, and in a lot of cases that will directly impact your lowering of turnover.
Sure. Yeah, I think the 2026 Gallup poll, and it said something like global employee engagement fell to 20% this year.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's gone since 2020. It's gone down a percentage point every year since 2020. And there's of course we can't unravel that situation. That's way too long for this purpose. Right. But there's a reasons why that's occurring, and I think again a lot of it. Some of the correlation there is you have leaders who really can't lead people, and that's a big miss for a lot of organizations, especially organizations that are lower middle market size companies, between 50 and maybe 250, 300 employees. A lot of times they do not invest in their leaders, and that's a critical miss for them organizationally. And from a
now in mentioning leaders, a term a couple of times early on, and just a few minutes ago, was teaching your leaders how to trust with people. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What's what in that area? Where do you think helps people out? What's going on in that area?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest things is that probably, no, it's a great question. I'd say one of the biggest things is that employees, for the most part, and part of this goes back into the Gallup poll, I would say employers and managers, let's say leaders, and again, happy to define manager and leader. A manager manages stuff. They manage a budget, they manage their resources, they manage inventory, they manage sales metrics. And a leader inspires people, they motivate people, they create relationships with people. So the leader side is much more people oriented, where the manager is much more of you're managing things, and you're managing things including budgets and what have you. So going back to your question though, I think one of the biggest misses that's directly correlated to engagement, I think there continues to be a decline in trust between the employee and the employer. That continues to decline. And I think a little bit of it goes back into, part of that is also because I think the power of connections and relationships. And I was actually at a presentation this morning by a person who's a great speaker, a gentleman by the name of Lee Colan. And he was talking about human relationships. And I think we continue to have a lack of human relationships. And a lot of it is just getting to know the people on your team, having face-to-face one-on-ones. In some cases, we work with teams in the Philippines or in India. We outsource a lot of work. A lot of people still work remotely. So I think that human interaction is still there's a huge mess that's happening organizationally. And a lot of this goes back into the power of one-to-one conversations with employees, between the employee and the. So I think one of the key things that is a very somewhat simple to implement is having at least monthly one-on-ones that is not a business agenda. You're simply checking in to see how that person's doing. There's no agenda. It's not a project status. It's not a financial status. It's not business related. It's people related. I always go back into when the person wants their car or their truck when they come to work, they do not leave the personal side of they don't personal self in the vehicle. Their personal self comes to work with all the baggage. And sometimes, unfortunately, people have a lot of baggage. They may have 3 young kids at home and they got 2 hours of sleep last night. They may have a 16-year-old who's going a little bit crazy. They may be also taking care of an elderly parent. So all of these things impacted the individual, and some leaders, they say I don't need to know about all that stuff. Well, yeah, you do need to know about that stuff, because that's how you build up that relationship, and that's what increases, that's that trust with that person. And a lot of times those are people who you can retain longer with your company.
Well, I appreciate the making it generic. When you said baggage, I saw you staring straight at me, so I thought you'd heard something about me, and I'm glad you kind of genericized it so it wasn't.
No, it's not. I don't think it's. I don't know all. No, I'm sure you have baggage, Steve, but I don't know all the baggage you have. But we all have baggage as humans, right? Sure. We all have baggage. It doesn't matter if you have a 22-year-old working for you or a 52-year-old working for you. Each one of them has some level of baggage, and unfortunately, some whole ton of baggage, and and sometimes the manager's like, I'm not the shrink, I'm not the psychologist, I don't want to know this stuff. But it's even just showing you care about the person. Kim Scott, Radical Candor, great book. I talked about it with a group earlier this week. Great book to read, and it's really about holding people very accountable, but it's also for caring about them individually. That's the basic premise of it, and their whole model is based on that. Just because you hold a person accountable doesn't mean I don't care about you as a person. And so, again, we don't unravel that.
Right.
But it's still, you should care for your people, and especially for that younger generation of people. They want an organization that cares for them as an individual as much as an organization that cares for them for the productivity at work.
Sure. Now, how do you, and we're kind of coming close to the end of our time, but you just kind of brought up two points that I think are, I hear you saying that, having that face-to-face one-on-one is really important because people are becoming losing engagement. But the other side, people want to work remotely. They don't want to come into work. They don't want to in the cameras in some cases when they're having meetings and stuff. How do people to really be more face to face when they think they want to be? They're feeling disengaged, but they're wanting to work remote. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, no, it's a huge dilemma. I would say, and again, I know we're timing out here soon, but I would say some of the quick things to do is a couple of quick things, and depending on where, because even remote employees, my son-in-law, my daughters are married, my son-in-law, quite a bit of his workforce is remote, and they live in different places. They're not just working 20 miles down the road. They're actually, some of them work 500 miles away. Mm-hmm. They actually, on a monthly basis, they actually fly people in to meet face to face. So they think it's valuable. They actually they need to have people get together. Some companies may not be able to afford that if, let's say, 60% of their people are remote and they don't live close by. But I would say even something basic, you could do a virtual happy hour that is Teams or Zoom related. You could do that to say, we're going to get together. We're going to shut down at 3:00 today, and what I know some companies do too. We're actually going to have, if somebody has a great hobby that they would like to talk to the people and maybe present about the fun hobby. Maybe they're a huge coin collector or whatever it is, whatever the thing is. You could even have in that virtual happy hour saying, okay, we're shutting down work at 3 on a Friday, and maybe it's 50 people or what have you in that business, but you could have a virtual happy hour and just getting people to talk about how things are going, what do they have plans for the weekend. You could very fun agenda. And ideally, if it's a remote, you bring people in on a regular frequency. If it's not monthly, maybe it's quarterly. You actually bring people in live to actually find out what's, have a team building of doing something around team building and collaboration. And maybe you wrap it around some fun activities, a real fun lunch, a real fun dinner, happy hour. So, I think for a lot of organizations, you can do things that are almost low cost or no cost, but I still think having people, I know some organizations that are hybrid that allow, in some cases, what they do, which I think is very effective, if they allow people to work from home, they would allow them to be hybrid if they want to on a Monday and Friday, and they make it mandatory that all employees who are local are in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So the beauty there is, of course, you can wrap it around a weekend, which is nice. But if you need to have team meetings, the beauty is if it's mandatory to be in Tuesday through Thursday, you would have your team face-to-face meetings. You would from Tuesday to Thursday instead of letting everybody pick their hybrid option. And then so-and-so's not, people on the team are not here today because they're working remote. Well, yeah, that's probably not ideal. So I think it's as simple as maybe even just setting. We do even just setting. We're hybrid Monday and Friday, and so maybe if you're all done with your work at 3:00 on a Friday, great. You start your weekend early. But that way, also with that cadence, you can then all schedule all your team-related meetings on Tuesday through Thursday.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Great tip. I like it. Well, Mark, if there's one thing I've learned in my leadership, it's that wisdom isn't measured how much we say, but kind of what after we stop talking. So before I let you ride off into this overcast sunset today, what's the one big takeaway you'd want our listeners to carry away with them?
Sure, I would say the one big takeaway, which is great, great question, Steve. I'd say the one big takeaway is focus on making sure you equip your leaders to be making sure you equip your leaders to lead effectively.
Okay.
I would say that's one of the biggest things that, and this have to be sending leaders to an executive MBA at TCU or SMU. You don't have to spend $100,000 or $200,000 to invest in a leader. You can do things things as basic as with leaders, you could have them read a book, Radical Candor by Kim Scott, and you actually do a book study. Have them read a chapter a week And then on a Friday afternoon or Friday at lunch, you bring in lunch, you bring your leaders together, and you talk about the 2 or 3 learnings you learned from that chapter that week. And again, you can probably pick the book up for $10 used on Amazon, and that would be a huge way to actually equip your leaders to be successful.
Nice, I like it. Now, along after visit summary, I also got to give some people some prescriptions. You know, it's the system, so I can't let you just leave. I gotta let you live with something pharmaceutical. So, what are your small prescriptions that go along?
Yeah, I will do it. I'm a shameful marketing plug. So I just book. So
Excellent.
So people are your profit. So people are your profit. Transform your biggest expense into your biggest asset. So I would say it was written. It's a very practical guide. So it's not an academic read. So I would say some of the things we talked about here, Steve, are in the book. So, you know, if you wanted to, I'd be thrilled if you picked up a copy on Amazon. So people are your profit. That's one of the big takeaways there. I would say a podcast, if you're a fan of podcasts. I love the leadership from Patrick or Pat Lencioni. And so he's written books, you know, the 5 dysfunctions of a team. Yes, exactly. So, yep, you hit the nail on the head, Steve. So listening to the group podcasts are great. I think Patrick Lencioni is a in leadership. He's an executive coach to hundreds of CEOs. He has a lot of innovation, great books too, but he also has that great the Table Group. Listening to some of Patrick Lencioni, or he goes by Pat. Listening to some of his material, I would say, would be really thought-provoking. We also have a podcast at HR Problem Solver, so that is just called HR. So HR Catalyst. So our podcast is our Problem Solver. So some of the things that we talked, they're on all the major podcasting channels. So if you ever want to listen to some of that I shared some insight with today, HR Problem Solver could be one that you may want to take a listen to also.
Excellent. Yeah, we actually, oddly enough, we did a kind of study of dysfunctions. Gosh, it's been like 10 years ago now. But I particularly liked Motive, his book, The Motive. You know, for me as a leader. But so if people have some HR questions or want to reach out, what's the recommended way to reach out to you?
Yeah, I would say one of the simplest ways to do that is you could go on our website. So you can just go out on hrcatalystconsulting.com, and there is a place where they can reach out to me directly to schedule a call. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. So you got Mark Mitford, Mitford, and I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. And so I would say those are the 2 best ways to connect me, Steve. And I'm always happy to talk to somebody, share ideas with them, and if there's a way that we can help them out in some facet, we'd love to be able to do that.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure they'll appreciate that. I'll make sure and include that in our show notes. For myself, you can always reach out to me, the doctor at fulcrumgroup.net, THEDOCTOR, all spelled out, at fulcrumgroup.net, or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Wow, a lot of stuff today, a lot of good stuff. And I guess this brings us to the end of another doctor's appointment. And I'd say that today's conversation is, for me, it's just a really great that, stronger leadership and their cultures don't just improve morale. They actually impact your business results. And so if you've for today's episode, be sure to watch, subscribe, share it with another leader. Just send us your ideas for future topics or guests you'd like to hear on the show. I'd love to hear them. Thanks for spending part with us. I'm your host, Steve the Dr. Meek, and the doctor is out. Talk to you next time. Thanks so much, Mark. Appreciate you on today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Doctor.